Imagine if the Washington Metro system had little drawings at every station that helped you identify them. The thing is, this almost happened, but right before the Metro opened, they canceled the plan to include pictograms. Now, 50 years later, I've redesigned them. I made 98 pictograms for 98 stations. Here's how I did it. Stations have names. It's how we tell them apart. It's how we know where to go. Station names are such an obvious tool for navigation, we never really stop to think about how important they are and what a far-reaching impact they can have on their neighborhoods. Might even unknowingly be living in an area named after its station. But for how essential station names are, they still do have limitations. I can read Woodley Park, Zoo, Adams Morgan just fine. But this is a bit of a challenge for me. That's because understanding and remembering a station name requires you to master a language to a certain level. In our own cities, we tend to take this for granted, but it's interesting to stop and think about ways to make station names even more universal. Is it possible not to abandon words and letters, but to find an additional way to communicate a name? More practically, how can people who don't understand the local language, or who face other barriers to reading, still find the station they need to be at? One commonly used tool is station numbering. This is a very popular method in several Asian countries. For example, in Tokyo, every railway line has 1 or 2 letters that represent it. Every station is then labeled by that letter, followed by its own unique number. As this practice was adopted over the past few decades, first by subway companies and then by the commuter railways, it was primarily intended to make navigation easier for foreign visitors. E25 is quite a bit easier to find on a map than Kokuritsu Kyogijo. Station numbers have become widespread in Asian countries, but you can find them even in other cities like Seattle or Atlanta. More than just a tool for overcoming language barriers, they can serve as a useful reference, helping irregular users understand a station's place within the broader system. But there's one language even more universal than numbers: pictures. We all recognize drawings of things. As babies, before we know any words, the first books we read are picture books. If there's one transit system that's famous for communicating station names with drawings, it's Mexico City. The Mexico City Metro opened in 1969, and all the wayfinding was designed by an American designer known as Lance Wyman. Lance Wyman had just designed different pictograms for the Mexico City Olympics that were held in 1968, and he thought that the pictogram concept would be useful on the metro system as well, especially because at that time Mexico City had decently high rates of illiteracy. By giving every single station its own unique pictogram, people would be able to navigate the system even if reading was difficult for them. The pictograms became a success and today are a defining feature of the system. And not just the metro, the bus lines, the cable cars, even suburban trains, they've all adopted it. It's not a system that's unique to Mexico City. In fact, Seattle used to have them. Portland, Oregon used to have pictograms for their bus routes. But Mexico City is the most famous, the best example of a city that implemented it and then stuck with it on a large scale. In 2024, I spent about a week writing all the public transportation in Mexico City, but eventually it was time to go home. On the flight back, an idea popped into my head. I thought to myself, what if our own metro in DC had these symbols as well? After all, we do have a pretty iconic metro map.
I like the fact that it's different to many other transit maps. It's unmistakable. It's unique.
This is Mark Ovenden, writer, lecturer, and television and radio presenter hailing from the United Kingdom, and author of one of my favorite books ever, Iconic Transit Maps. It's a deep dive into 50 transit maps from around the world, showcasing their evolution and the intentional design processes that went into them.
My mum used to quieten me down as an annoying kid on the underground. On long journeys, she used to give me an underground map and say, look, shut up, Mark, and have a look at this. And I became fascinated by the London Underground diagram and then the transit maps of other cities around the world.
He was kind enough to let me speak to him for today's video. Signs, logos, and maps, they don't just appear out of thin air. For them to be done well, a lot of thought has to be put into them.
And as far back as I think it was about 1968, a company called Unimark were contracted to work on the branding and the signage for the WMATA. He had a lot of designers involved with it at the time, and one of them was Massimo Vignelli. And it was him, I think, who proposed the idea of calling the Washington, D.C. system the Metro. And in fact, him that came up with the big M logo. They came down to Washington, they had these suggestions, and they'd already completed for New York City a graphics standards manual for the New York City subway. I think they did that in about 68 as well. So their driving design principles were incorporated. Really, they were all about simplicity and minimalism. And that's why the idea of Metro came up and the big capital M logo. So between about 68 and 70, Unimark created a graphics standards manual for WMATA. And that included a very kind of sketchy outline, provisional schematic diagram of the Washington Metro map. And of course, that went on to form the sort of building blocks for what came later. If you fast forward to January 1974, where everything's currently being built in DC, it wasn't Unimark who won the contract to design the final Metro map. It was a guy called Lance Wyman. Now, Lance was someone who's a great graphic designer who was very well known for work he'd done in Mexico City. He was told when he won the contract for Washington to keep the ideas that were proposed by Vignelli, the schematic idea proposed by Vignelli. And I think there's a diary entry that was found from the 22nd of July 1974, which showed a sketch done by Lance, which was very similar to the schematic produced by Vignelli in the manual.
So I thought that I would add to the rich history of DC's Metro design language by creating Mexico City-style pictograms for all 98 stations. So imagine my shock when flipping through Mark's book again and realizing that I wasn't the first person to have this idea. I wasn't even the coolest person to have this idea.
He was a real fan of the pictogram, a pictogram for each station, and it was a big success in Mexico City. So he thought, well, it gave the stations a sense of place. Why not use those ideas in Washington, D.C. as well? Lance believed that there was a really valid reason for proposing pictograms for D.C. to help give those stations a kind of a sense of place.
We have some of the initial sketches that Mr. Wyman made. These were never just fun little doodles or a silly what if. The Metro map that hundreds of thousands of people glance at every day, it actually looks the way it does because of these pictograms.
He drafted a diagrammatic map deliberately, which would help to include the pictograms within the station marker. So the station marker is a solid black circle, and he deliberately made those larger than usual, and as seen in other parts of the world, and then subsequently made the lines themselves quite a lot fatter or broader than they are in other parts of the world. And that was done deliberately to accommodate the pictograms in the center of the circles where the station marker was.
So why don't we have them? Because minimalism.
There's a story which my good friend Peter Lloyd found out about, and he tells that Massimo Vignelli, after doing the sort of basic work for the Graphic Standards Manual, got wind of the idea that they wanted to use a pictogram in a circle concept. And as Peter says, Vignelli blew his stack. That's his words. Although he completely respected Lance Wyman as a designer, he was really opposed to the idea of pictograms because they sort of violated his minimalist principles. He thought it would sort of ruin the look of the map and the stations to be cluttered with pictograms. And apparently Vignelli wrote to the WMATA, 27th of November 1974, pushing the minimalist agenda. And apparently the transit agency swallowed that, and then they dispensed with Lance's pictograms, but stuck with the large black open circles with the white centers. And of course they remain on the map to this day with no pictograms inside them, just white space.
This only fueled my desire to redesign them even more, and so I made the decision. This was going to be my big project of 2025. Of course, designing 98 pictograms is easier said than done. Literacy rates in DC today are probably a bit higher than in Mexico City 50 years ago, though you might not come to that conclusion reading YouTube comment sections. Are ideas like this really worth the effort? In some online spaces and in personal interactions, I've heard the sentiment that with the proliferation of smartphones and apps, agencies should step away from physical traditional wayfinding. I remember one time being 19 and little baby me found himself sitting on a panel about the Rotterdam Metro, arguing with a transit expert with decades of experience who was saying that audio announcements are no longer necessary. It left me scratching my head. Like I said, I'm not a minimalist, and while I do hate clutter, I believe that an appropriate, coordinated amount of redundancy greatly benefits accessibility. I've always firmly believed that transportation can only be great when it is easy to navigate by any first-time user. It's why I've always argued for things like consistent stopping patterns and simple names. So ultimately, I do think that finding an extra way for people to find the right station is a noble pursuit.
It sounds theoretical, but just a minute ago, two people who spoke Chinese came up to us and asked us how to get to Dulles Airport. So we grabbed Google Maps, we grabbed translator apps, and we eventually figured it out. But what if I could just point to a drawing of an airplane? How good is your Chinese?
Pretty bad.
When budgets are tight, transit agencies should absolutely focus on other accessibility improvements. I'm not here to argue that these symbols must be brought back at all costs and Metro must invest in them. Hey, I made them for free. I did it for the mental exercise and for the fun of it. Plus, I got to meet Mark. But hey Metro, if you want them, you can have them in exchange for a ride on the pickle. Here's how I made them. Before you can even begin drawing, you need to know what to draw. While obviously this project is heavily inspired by Lance Wyman, I did not want to just take over the symbols that he had already drawn. I started completely from scratch, partially to create a consistent set that matched the Metro of half a century later, and partially to really make it my own thing. I created an Excel sheet, and in the first column I added all the station names alphabetically. The second column would contain the actual object I was going to draw, and the third column housed the explanation for my decision. Before I go any further, I need to make one thing very clear. The point of pictograms is recognition, not association. You may have noticed that this video is a re-upload. I first published this video a few weeks ago and got a lot of feedback. Specifically, a lot of people wrote that I should have picked this instead, or more people associate this station with that thing. Special shout out to the person who recommended I do a house for a specific suburban station because it's in the suburbs. Right. It should be clear that the people who would benefit from pictograms and the people who know the system well enough to associate stations with things are two entirely separate groups of people. For a pictogram to work, you need to see it on a map, remember it, and then recognize it on a station sign to know that you've reached your destination. You don't have to know why that specific pictogram was chosen. When I was in Mexico City, I used the pictures to navigate, even though for most of them I had no idea why they were there. Now, having the pictogram have something to do with the area around a station does have navigational benefits. Like, if you're going to a ball game, having Navy Yards pictogram be a baseball is helpful. Same with Union Station. You already know you're going to the train station, it makes it easier to find. But it's not a necessity. If I had decided to use 98 random different animals, or 98 random different food items, as long as they were distinguishable, they would be just as effective as the pictograms I've chosen to use. I decided to pick things that actually had something to do with the stations and the areas around them for a few reasons. First, it's what Lance Wyman did, both in Mexico and in DC. Second, the challenge made it a lot more fun, and let me get to know the city better. Hopefully that's cleared up some confusion. Now let me explain my system for determining what station got what pictogram. First, I looked at the name to see if it provided an obvious opportunity for a pictogram. Stations like Branch Avenue and King Street come to mind. Sometimes a name can provide an opportunity for a pictogram, but it's just less obvious. For example, I was thinking about what to do with Rockville, and I could draw a rock, but how do you draw a rock? Like, how do you know that that's a rock? A rock guitar, on the other hand, easy to identify. But not every station name can just be drawn. I mean, do you really want me to draw a Foggy Bottom? So then you look at the environment around the station. Are there monuments, landmarks, attractions, offices? So for McPherson Square, obviously the closest attraction is the White House. By giving it a White House symbol, people can just look at the map and immediately know where to go. College Park sits next to the oldest continuously operating airport in the United States, so I thought an old biplane would be appropriate. Roslyn, well, my mind immediately goes to the Key Bridge connecting DC and Virginia right there. Not every place has a landmark, but most places have a story, and so my next step was to look at the history of a neighborhood and see if something could be drawn from that. So both Addison Road and Ashburn are in places that used to be farms. Addison Road specifically was a dairy farm, and so I did a picture of a cow, while Ashburn I did a more generic barn. And then Potomac Yard. I've said this in other videos, but this was once one of the largest and most important rail yards in the eastern United States. Today the area has been redeveloped. To pay tribute to its rich history, I drew a man with a shovel working in the rail yard. Some stations are named after people, like Morgan Boulevard, named after Garrett Morgan, an inventor who invented, among other things, a type of hairbrush. And for New Carrollton, I decided to draw a pen because New Carrollton is named after Charles Carroll of Carrollton. Out of all the people who signed the Declaration of Independence, he was the last to pass away. My favorite category, though, I think, are the stations where the pictogram has more than one meaning. Take, for example, Greensboro. The station stands on the site of a former farm stand that sold apples, but it's also close to the shopping mall that had the world's first Apple store back in 2001. Or what about Eisenhower Avenue? Obviously, the station is located in the middle of a highway interchange, but Eisenhower was also the president who really pushed for the development of the interstate highway system. And then some stations, since I am the creator, I decided to take a little bit of creative license and give them pictograms depicting some of my personal experiences at that station. So for the Farragut stations, Farragut West and Farragut North, I did a duck with either a W or an N, because in my experience that park is always full of ducks. And Van Ness Station, I did tulips because it's the closest station to the Dutch embassy, and as a Dutch citizen, I kind of felt like it was my duty to do that. So when designing these pictograms, I really tried to think hard about who is going to see these, use them, and where are they going. So stations that are more frequently visited by tourists and other people that are not familiar with the system, I wanted to give simple, understandable pictograms. For example, Mount Vernon Square is a star because that's where the convention center is, and if somebody wants to go there, it needs to be very easy to communicate how to get there. Star is an almost universally recognized symbol. Where simplicity gets much more difficult, but in my opinion also a little bit less necessary, is out in the suburbs. This is not me trying to be a city elite ripping on the suburbs again. Some suburbs simply just don't have interesting stories or other landmarks that you can easily draw from. Some of these places are car suburbs that were developed in the late 20th century, and they just don't all have the same kind of history as some of the more dense places on the system do. However, that also means that it is less likely for people unfamiliar with the system to visit them, and so it is all right to have pictograms that are a tiny bit more complicated. Like take Twin Brook, which got its name because the area that was being developed was bordered by two streams. So I ended up drawing two bodies of flowing water. Now, for a popular downtown destination, I would want to draw a symbol that is more obvious what it is. But for Twin Brook, I think the people that need to go there can figure it out. After a mix of online and on-site research, I had a large majority of the stations done. But there were a few stations left that were really breaking my brain.
I would have thought one of the potential problems you face, not all of them would immediately lend their history, their locality to a pictogram. So you're going to have to do a lot of research in some of those stations that perhaps don't have something really obvious.
He was right. I needed help. Well, if anybody would know, it would be my friend Andy. Andy on Track is famed for his Secrets of the Metro series, and it's one of the best works on this side of YouTube. Not just because he shows you the stations, but precisely because his videos highlight the neighborhoods surrounding the stops as well.
Now, almost every station has a story, but in some cases, I just don't know that story very well, like Benning Road. And in cases like that, it's helpful to have a second person who can come up with ideas.
Alright, so what we want to show you is just up the escalators, just outside the one exit here at Benning Road Station. Now, when I did Secrets of the Blue Line now a couple years ago, we went to all parts of the Blue Line from Addison Road. We looked at the artwork honoring Garrett Morgan at Morgan Boulevard, the Largo Lens in Largo. Now, one station we didn't get a lot of chances to go look at was Benning Road Station, and one of our commenters mentioned that one thing we did miss, and that now I can say I visited, is the famous Shrimp Boat Plaza.
Shrimp Boat Plaza opened as a seafood restaurant in the 1950s, and in the years following, a community grew around it. The restaurant always stayed at the center of the community, and even though many things have changed, it continues to be a landmark in the neighborhood and a cornerstone of the community's collective memory. Thanks to Andy and his viewers, we now have a pictogram for Benning Road. It's a shrimp.
Andy got added to the Excel sheet, which is the true sign of any great friendship, and soon we had 98 ideas for pictograms, which means it was time to start drawing. The first step in this process was to make sketches by hand. I printed some sheets of paper with circles on them and made 98 very crude drawings of what I wanted the pictograms to look like for each station. Then, with those as an example, I opened up an application known as Inkscape. I've been using Inkscape for years to make pretty much all the maps and diagrams for my videos. I find it very easy to use, and it was the perfect tool for this project. And before drawing, I asked Mark what his advice would be.
If you need to show a detail on top of the outline of the thing, like a smiley face or something, as you would see in a photograph kind of thing, then you haven't done a good design.
So on Inkscape, you start with straight lines and you use them to draw a shape. Then with this tool, you can make the lines bend and curve as you wish. Now we've got kind of the shape of one of the petals. Let's fill it in. I made a black copy and a white copy of every single shape that I made. And then once the picture's done, you export it. They were all in a folder. And then I opened a PowerPoint file. Now on this file, I had circles in all the different colors of the metro, and so this one, I need a silver one. We're going to import the picture that I just saved, the black version, and add it to the file. See, now we have 98 different pictograms already with the right color as a background. As I was designing these, sometimes a design would turn out looking more complicated than I had anticipated, and so Mark's words would echo in my head.
Then you haven't done a good design.
While the spreadsheet was a helpful guide, sometimes during the design phase, I would have to come up with a different design because once you see it in front of you, you realize that it is either too confusing or too similar to something else. Take McLean, for example. I had initially decided to do a newspaper, since John Roll McLean was the owner of the Washington Post. But a newspaper drawing would look too similar to the Declaration of Independence at Archives or to the book at Metro Center. So I decided to do a piggy bank instead, referring to the Capital One office buildings right next to the station. At the end of the day, this is more than an art project. We're trying to make useful tools for navigation. So that meant constantly putting myself in the shoes of somebody who's not familiar with the metro or with the region, and revising based on that. So for example, West Falls Church, I thought initially I should do a bus drawing. This is because West Falls Church has an abandoned bus station. Before the Silver Line opened, passengers going to Dulles Airport would transfer from the metro to a bus here. Now, because the Silver Line is open, the bus station is abandoned. Doing a bus drawing would be a cool tribute to the past, but it may also confuse people into thinking this is where a bus station would be, just like how you use an airplane symbol to indicate where an airport is. Clearly, you can't get on the bus here, it's abandoned, so I had to come up with a different way to pay tribute to the station's history while not making people think that this is where you catch a Greyhound.
Besides the people whose contributions you saw in the video today, this was a process that took many months and involved feedback from disability advocates, designers, historians, friends, and family. But I also wanted a little bit more general feedback, so I initially published a version of this video in February. I got a lot of feedback. Some of the points were very good. Unfortunately, many of them were also not as good. A lot of contradicting advice, as I mentioned earlier, some confusion, but that makes sense. You spend the better part of a year with a team of people working on something and then present that to people who have only had a few minutes to think about the concept. The feedback you're going to receive is mixed. However, it was a goal of mine to use the bit of helpful feedback that I received to make these pictograms even better, and this is the final result. Now, this is something that I'm very proud of, and it's a project that to me personally is now closed. I'm happy with the results. I spent a lot of time and effort into it. I've gotten the feedback that I want, and now it's for you to enjoy.
process took a long time, but after months of drawing, I finally had 98 pictograms, which I believe best represent the unique identities of the 98 different metro stations. In this video, I don't have time to explain the meaning behind every single pictogram. But don't worry, for channel members and for patrons, I'm making 3 bonus videos where I will go station by station and explain my thought process for why I picked that pictogram. So if that's something that sounds interesting to you, please consider signing up for a membership or becoming a patron on Patreon. I've also launched a limited merch collection with these pictograms. Some t-shirts, a poster with all of them on it. This was a big project, and I'm excited to celebrate it. I've moved my store over to a new website, which has lower prices and quicker delivery time. If you do buy a t-shirt, a hoodie, or a poster, make sure to snap a pic of it and send it to me on Instagram or via email. But besides merch, where should these pictograms go? Well, I drew some inspiration from Mexico City and figured that since in Mexico they're shown at street level, here in DC they should probably be displayed on the pylons. Furthermore, they should be on the screens in the trains as well as on the maps.
I would go further and put the pictogram on the station signage on the platform too, if you're going to go down this road, because one of the great lessons of wayfinding, which I've learned from reading everybody else's good books, is you have to be consistent.
Sure, let's put them on the signs. That would look a little something like this. Now you'll notice I haven't drawn any pictograms for Mark, VRE, or the Purple Line, but in Mexico City, they do use pictograms for the light rail and the suburban trains. So now it's up to you, my viewers. If this is something you're interested in, why not try designing your own pictograms for either the Purple Line, one of the suburban train systems, or a completely different system that you're passionate about. If you do draw them, send them to me at my email address. Just some tips, they should be different from the ones that I've already made, and you should remember the design rules that we talked about in this video. Happy drawing! Anyway, that's all I have for today. Thank you so much for watching this video, even though it's re-uploaded. I really hope you enjoyed it. On Friday, I'll be back with another video about the Metro because it is the 50th anniversary, and that's worth celebrating. If you haven't already, please subscribe to Trains Are Awesome. We'll see you next time.